Hello, boys and girls. This is Mr. Kizik, and I wanted to give you guys a little support video for your homework. So, adding and subtracting radicals is just like adding and subtracting variables. For example, if I had 2x plus 3x, you would say, oh, let's combine like terms, and you would get 5x. Well, same thing with radicals. If I had, say, 2 square root 2 plus 3 square root 2, because they have like radicals here, I would just add the coefficients here and get 5 square root 2. Well, what happens if you had something like 2 square root 2 plus 3 square root 8? From first glance, you might say to yourself, well, those can't combine. Well, they can, because you always want to see, can I simplify the square roots? And you can. This becomes square root 4 square root 2. And this becomes 2 square root 2. And don't forget, we got to multiply this 3. So now we have 2 square root 2 plus 6 square root 2. Like terms, I get 8 square root 2. So something that wouldn't be able to be combined is if I had, say, this problem was instead 2 square root 2 plus 6 cube root 2. These are not like terms because of those indices there, they're different. So that would be let alone like that. The next thing that was talked about was multiplying radicals. Multiplying radicals is the same thing, just like multiplying variables here. So if I had something like square root 3 times the square root 5, there's a property in math that says if we have square roots that have the same indices like these do, we could just multiply the two numbers together on the inside to get our answer. So say I have, for example, 2 square root 3 times 3 square root, no, let's just say 2. Now, if this was an addition problem, then you'd be done because I can't combine them. However, since you're multiplying, you just multiply the coefficients here. So 2 times 3 is 6. And since these radicals have the same indice, you just multiply the numbers inside. 3 times 2, 6. So that would be my final answer here. Let's kick it up a notch a little bit, and let's say we had something like the square root of 5 times 1 minus 3 square root 2. Well, this is the same thing as if you had 5 times 1 minus 3x. You would distribute. So the same concept goes here. You distribute. Square root 5 times 1 is square root 5. Square root 5 times negative 3 square root 2. Well, the 3 just comes along because there's nothing on the outside here except this 1. And then square root 5 times square root 2 is square root 10. These are different radicals, so therefore we are done. Just like with adding and subtracting, where the radicals need to be the same, even though multiplication now need to be the same, the indices need to be the same. For example, if I had something like cube root of 2 times the square root of 3, I cannot combine. And the reason being is because of the indices. Let's look at a couple more here. Let's say we had 1 minus the square root of 2 times 3 plus the square root of 3. Well, this is just like 1 minus 2x times 3 plus 3x. You would FOIL. So I'm going to do the same thing here. 1 times 3 is 3. 1 times square root of 3 is square root of 3. Negative square root of 2 times 3 is negative 3 square root of 2. Negative square root of 2 times positive square root of 3 is negative square root of 6. None of these can combine here because they cannot be simplified, so therefore I'm done. This last one we'll look at is going to actually lead into next week's lesson. Say we had 5 plus the square root of 3, 5 minus square root of 3. If you recall, when we have variables, this is like saying 5 plus x, 5 minus x. Still FOIL, but remember what happens to the middle terms? The middle terms will go away. It's the same concept here. So let's take a look. 5 times 5 is 25. 5 times negative square root of 3 is negative 5 square root of 3. 5 times square root of 3 is positive 5 square root of 3. And the square root of 3 times negative square root of 3. Well, what we talked about before, we can multiply the insides and we would have this. But what does that simplify down to? Square root of 9 is 3. And then by combining like terms, these go away. And 25 minus 3 is 22. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is the basics of this lesson here. So if you still have any questions, please let me know.